Historiography. While historians may follow a process like the gather method to investigate the past, there are many other ways in which they also interpret historical events. This is why we need the field of historiography. It helps us determine how one historical event has been interpreted and written about over time. This is important as lawmakers often rely on the context of history when considering new legislation, creating new laws, and evaluating existing ones. For this reason, it is necessary for lawmakers to examine the various ways different historians have approached a historical topic throughout the years. If we were conducting research for our paper on the Siege of Yorktown, we might want to learn more information about how Benedict Arnold's treason and desertion affected the outcome of the Revolutionary War. Benedict Arnold was a general in the American Continental Army. In 1780, Arnold was serving as commander of the American fort at West Point, New York. Over several months, he refused to repair cracks in the fort's foundation, weakening it gradually. In August of 1780, Arnold secretly met with British Major John Andre. During the meeting, Arnold handed over information that would allow the British troops to take control of the fort. West Point was considered the most strategically important location of the American Revolution. If the British troops did indeed gain control of West Point, they would win the war. After leaving his meeting with Arnold, John Andre was caught by American spies and, as we know, the Americans won the war. Some historians, along with popular opinion, hold that Arnold was the greatest traitor in American history. Others allow that Arnold's treason, and the outrage it inspired among American colonists, galvanized American soldiers during the final years of the war, motivating them to employ novel tactics that ultimately led to victory for the 13 colonies. If lawmakers were deciding on new legislation regarding treason, these different interpretations of the same historical event would affect their attitudes about the legislation. If you are interested in issues like this, you might want to investigate the field of historiography, or the history of history. Many college courses require a historiographical analysis of an event before students can begin conducting their own research on that event. What do you think are the benefits of this? Historiographical research not only improves our background knowledge about a particular subject, but it also exposes areas where we may hold biases. A bias is an unfair tendency to favor one side of an argument over another. We can think of a bias as a filter. When we research a topic, all of the information we gather has to pass through this filter, and in so doing, is slightly altered by our bias. It is no longer the original information. We all have biases, but we need to be aware of how they influence the decisions we make as researchers. The events that take place in our society eventually end up being called history. Lawmakers typically observe historical events and movements in an effort to understand how things have changed, so they can set laws that help society function better. Understanding historiography and the different ways an event can be interpreted can help lawmakers realize that they may have a certain interpretation of history that is unique to them. They need to be willing to acknowledge any biases and see different perspectives of the same historical event. When all perspectives are discussed, lawmakers can create laws that work for all citizens. History and law in the United States. Because law is an aspect of human society, it is always shaped by the history of the society in which it develops. We know that law in the United States was influenced by the system of English common law in Europe, and the signing of the U.S. Constitution, which outlined the function and structure of the United States government. But what other historical developments have impacted U.S. law? Amendments. One way we can understand the evolution of law in the United States is to examine how the Constitution has changed over the years. The process of changing the Constitution is long and arduous, but when it is successful, an amendment, or change, is added to the Constitution. For example, as the Constitution was in the process of being ratified by the 13 colonies, the framers added 10 amendments to the document. These 10 amendments are now known as the Bill of Rights. Although congressmen have submitted over 11,600 proposals to amend the Constitution since 1789, only 27 amendments have been added. Let's take a look at the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote in 1920. The questions historians must consider are, Why did lawmakers decide to add these amendments when they did? What movements in the larger society persuaded lawmakers to alter the Constitution in this way? Timeline of the 19th Amendments. In many ways, the United States changed in its first 150 years as a nation. For example, in 1865 the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in the United States, drastically altering the country's social and economic structures. Women have also gained more rights throughout history. In 1890, women did not have the right to vote in any country in the world. Today, no country prohibits women from voting. The historical movement that culminated in the ratification of the 19th Amendment is called women's suffrage. In the mid-1800s, women began to advocate for their own right to vote. These women, along with their supporters, asserted that women deserved the right to vote for politicians and legislation that furthered their interests and the interests of their families. The movement spanned over 70 years. 1848. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Lucretia Mott organized the first Women's Rights Convention at Seneca Falls. 1868. An amendment to grant women voting rights is proposed in the Senate but ultimately fails to pass. 1882. The Senate creates the Select Committee on Woman Suffrage. 1912. 9 states pass laws allowing women to vote. 1920. The 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is passed, allowing all citizens, regardless of their gender, to vote. When reviewing the sequence of events that led to the passing of the 19th Amendment, we might wonder, what events are transpiring today that will one day be known as history to those who live years from now? Current culture. Today, the women's suffrage movement continues as Congress routinely debates issues regarding maternity leave policies. The Institute for Women's Policy Research reports that 96% of the 186 countries surveyed provide some form of paid leave to women after childbirth. However, the United States is the only high-income country, and one of only 8 countries in the world that does not mandate paid leave for mothers of newborns. Gault et al., 2014, p. 2. According to the Pew Research Center, the United States is the only country among 41 nations that does not mandate any paid leave for new parents. Livingston, 2016. In 1993, the Family Medical Leave Act was passed in Washington, D.C. This act remains in effect today, and guarantees certain employees unpaid leave during a family medical emergency. In these cases, employees' jobs are protected, they will not lose their jobs, but they do not receive any income during the time that they are away caring for their family.